Hello, everyone. My name is Bailey Frederick, and welcome to this Kendall Hunt webinar, Preparing Students for an AI-Infused World. In this presentation, you'll be introduced to value-based frameworks for ensuring that AI remains a tool in service of human intention. Before we begin, just going over a few housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded and you will be receiving access in the coming days, as well as our presenters' contact information. And please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat and Q&A functions. And our presenter will get to them as they arise throughout our presentation, as well as at the end. Now to introduce and turn it over to our speaker, James Norrie.
Thank you very much, Bailey, and thank you to all of my colleagues for joining us today for this important conversation. So it is very clear that higher ed's at a bit of a crossroads, and I'm sure many of your institutions are struggling, as ours is, with what exactly we all need to do in this AI-infused era, and particularly the role that AI can play ethically in learning and developing our students. So I'm going to begin with a fairly abrupt statement. You will find me not at all a naysayer, so I'm not on the negative side, but on the realistic side of AI, and I am the author of Beyond the Code, which you see up there. And my position is that AI is like the genie is out of the bottle. It's here. It's not going away. And we're going to talk today about a collaboration between AI and IQ. And I'll get to what that means and why. But it's very important to understand that my position is that while there is clearly some peril and some things we need to avoid, it is absolutely clear to me that we have some opportunities. And actually, I'm on the side of the fact that I believe that we can actually do a lot with this to guide not just our students, but to have an impact in the academy generally on society. And I think that that is really powerful. And I hope you'll enjoy what we're about to embark on today. And without further ado, let's get right into that. So I am at the Graham School of Business. I am a professor of law, cybersecurity, and strategy. I teach in both graduate and undergraduate programs. And AI and cybersecurity now are inseparable. So in my disciplines, we don't really have a choice because AI is already in the hands of the attackers. So if we don't equip our defenders to use it, that puts me in a fairly perhaps unique space or part of the academy, a discipline where AI is already intruding both professionally and academically. Some of you may be a little further away from that direct impact or may have still some skepticism. I understand that. Hopefully, we'll be able to engage in this very constructive conversation together. Now, I am not going to go through the whole book chapter by chapter, but I am going to reference certain parts of the content of Beyond the Code because I think it helps in our conversation. And you might ask, why the visual bourbon or rye? Well, let me tell you that I'm constantly amazed because people, when they hear that I'm an AI expert or that I've written a book on AI, they will frequently ask me when I go to cocktail parties, what's your position on AI? As if it was as simple as, do you prefer bourbon or rye in your old fashions or your Manhattans? Well, first of all, it's not that simple. But the other thing that I'm mystified by is how few people I encounter out there, and I'm talking a little less perhaps about the academy and just more broadly about society, how few people seem to have fully formed their own ideas and opinions about AI. So let me ask you in this webinar, if you were thinking about that, and feel free to drop it into chat if you'd like to share your word with me. But when you hear AI, what shows up for you and why? And it's worth us lingering in that question as we begin the webinar today, because it means a lot of different things to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. And the same thing is true for our students in the classroom and for the industries we serve. And as our graduates move from college to career, it is really abundantly clear to me that AI is something that they should form opinions on and that I think they will need to be exposed to. So when you hear AI, and you hear the words IQ and you put those together, now what does a collaboration look like? Because that's even more powerful and more important. So we'll move on from that, but that is important for you to establish for yourself. And hopefully this webinar and the content of books like Beyond the Code and the things you're reading and discovering about AI and your own use can lead you to having your own fully formed opinion. Now, I want to begin with what is not startling news to those of us who are in AI, but it may be to some of you. I do believe that many people think that it was ChatGPT that somehow launched AI, and that's not really very accurate historically. And it's important that we bookend this from about the 1950s when a very famous computer scientist, Alan Turing, the um, the person who conceptualized the idea of the Turing test, and we'll come to that in a few minutes, he really began forecasting the development of thinking machines, as he called them, in the 1950s. Now, at that point in time, it was very sci-fi-ish and very futuristic. But since that time, you can see on this timeline, and I'm not going to again spend all of my time because you can read the slides as well as I can. But if you think about it, we've had a steady progress, and we really can define November the 30th, 2022 as a very important date historically, because that defines the pre and post chat GPT eras. This was the first publicly available generative AI, and I'll get to the differences in the types of models in just a little bit. The beginning of what we call chat, generative GPT-3. GPT-3 was the precursor to 3.5, which was launched on November the 30th, 2022. So if you bookend this, we have seen a steady drumbeat of completely advancing the idea of how we embed machine generated intelligence or reasoning into all of our systems, not just as standalone destinations. And this becomes very important for us. Now, it is important to note the phrase artificial intelligence, which you see up there in the corner. And leaving aside that I think it has promise, peril, and possibility for humanity, there is no doubt that we are in the AI era where the speed of adoption right now is breathtaking. In my own research, I look at something called technology hype cycles, and that is how quickly we are seeing various types of technology platforms, in this case, the AI, what we call the frontier models, the large AI platforms, announcing major innovations related to shifts in product capability or function. And while we used to be able to measure that in pre-social media days in years, then it became months. It can now be measured in days. In fact, it can be measured in sub 7 days, about 6.3 days now. So every 6.3 days or so, we see another announcement. And if you were to track these across the frontier models, you would recognize that we have seen a speed of both development of capability of AI and a speed of adoption, unlike any previous technology. Now, that said, with all of the obvious implications of that, I need to focus on that word artificial for a second because I don't want you to confuse what I'm saying. Well, AI is capable of machine intelligence and capable of reasoning, and it is true that humans have lost their planet-wide monopoly on reasoning. It is important to understand that this kind of AI that we're dealing with, generative AI platforms, are really still primarily good at mimicry. So while they are intelligent, they're actually super, super dumb smart machines, if that makes any sense. There's a really interesting quandary about AI because while it may seem quite amazing and smart, there are elements of it that are clearly constrained by the fact that it can never be sentient. So it is not us, and it is not IQ. Now, if I were to do this with you, if I were to ask you all to put your hands on top of your heads, and just while your hand is there, what do you feel? I mean, besides maybe your hair or not, as the case may be, but what do you feel? Maybe a little bit of heat, not an excessive amount, but probably some heat. You probably don't feel any vibration. You don't feel any hum or noise. Yet underneath this hand is the world's most capable and potent supercomputer. Our human brains, which are essentially massive neural networks, are incredibly powerful and incredibly efficient. They consume very little in the way of energy, just food and water and what we eat. They shed very little heat. They cool incredibly efficiently. So, unlike AI, which is proving to have an enormously difficult impact, environmental impact, for instance, because of data centers and the amount of energy and cooling necessary and all of that stuff, we don't have those problems. So we clearly have an advantage as humans where our IQ is very much more capable and efficient still than AI. But the gap is closing, and the nature of the gap is fundamentally still important for us to communicate to our students and to generally, as professionals, understand these machines are still mostly at a stage of mimicking us. And this is different than being us. Now, that said, there's a ton of research, and many of you probably know Pew, very reliable source of independent research. And this is really fascinating because if you look at the US as really the birthplace of the frontier models, although there are some in Europe, and Mistral is an example, or there is one in China, two now, generally speaking, it is a US based technology. And you can see in the results that there is more, perhaps, um, concern in the US than any place else about some of this, but also some excitement. So we see the balance of the same thing I was just talking about, this idea of both promise and peril. But generally speaking, there are more people that are either more concerned or equally concerned and excited. You can see that in the bottom part of this slide, than who are genuinely excited. So there is clearly a sense of some trepidation, some anxiety, and there should be because this technology truly is transformative and profound. So when we get to understanding its implications for society and using our podiums and our classrooms and our research to help create and shift the thinking about this, we need to understand that our audience, including many of our students, is anxious about this change. So we should understand that while the academy and its professors are probably concerned, so are the consumers of our offering. And so we're all going to be learning and growing and considering this together. And I think it's important because we do not have, for once, the audience moving ahead on this. They're being quite thoughtful and careful. And certainly in my own classroom, when I put up, ask people to put up their hands and say, how many of you have used AI? They've almost all used it to some extent. When I ask how many like it or rely on it, the hands rapidly go down. So this is a very real finding. Well, with that finding, let's move then to the idea of chapter 8, which is one of my favorite chapters of the book. And it's directly relevant to our webinar today. And it's relevant because, in my view, AI is not a destination, it's a foundational technology. And this chart helps you understand just how pervasive AI is already become in 3 years and how much more pervasive it's going to become. So what if AI was not like a website or a destination you visited? And certainly, by the way, not something that you could ban. We'll come to that in just a few minutes. But a layer that you live inside. What if this was more profound than just a technology shift? But it was creating an ecosystem, almost a technology cocoon, which is becoming so embracing in all parts of technology that you couldn't avoid it. So if, as professors in the academy, we are thinking about this still as a choice, this idea that somehow we can ban it or we can somehow prevent it, we may need to rethink that. And let me give you just a couple of examples to prove this point. Already you will see that search and AI are becoming one and the same. You can't use a search engine without having used AI. If you are on TikTok or other social media sites, if you look at Netflix, you're already using an AI-infused interface that is reading signals and signs and offering up things that are specific to you. So there's a lot of that. If you think about the way that you're going to be forced to use AI by many businesses at the point of first contact, you can't avoid it. So if it's not avoidable, then what do we do about it? And that's really the point of chapter 8. Do we want to ourselves as educators and professionals become victims or victors, but also what can we do to make sure our students turn into victors rather than victims? What can we do to equip them to go out into a world that is AI infused, this layer that they're going to live inside, and make sure they can do it with insight and with some ethics and with a view to protecting the human components? Now, if you accept that for just a second and you believe that AI is a foundational technology, I also want to then draw the line, but it does not deserve personhood. There's a risk that because of the way it interacts in plain language, that we begin and our students begin to humanize AI. And we should be very careful to not do that. As pervasive as it is still only a subset and it is not yet at what we call AGI. So let me run you through this slide because it's very important. So AI, which are really just artificial neural networks, they're technology that's attempting to replicate the way our human brains work. They are driven by a series of different sciences, right? Data science, clearly, because data is what enables the platform to actually work. Obviously, the techniques of artificial intelligence themselves, and particularly something we call tokenizing language. And that's where LLMs are. LLMs essentially take any language, tokenize it, and they become very good at predicting language. And as a result, that allows them in plain language to interact. So this idea of generating text by tokenizing language is a really important subset of AI, but that's what we're mostly dealing with. When people think about AI, they're thinking about ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and all of these XAI and all these other platforms, these frontier platforms, but they're all LLMs. There is, of course, underneath that, a broader set of capabilities besides text-based tokenizing that generates content. So we have image generators and we have now agentic AI and a series of different tools that are layered on top of LLMs and the technology of how we talk to AI so that we are in the era of what is now known to us in the AI space as generative artificial intelligence, GAI. Now, although there's only two letters in order difference between generative AI and artificial general intelligence, AGI, that is an enormously different thing altogether. And we are moving rapidly towards an era of AGI, but that is tomorrow's stakes. We are not there. It's going to take a few more years. When we began this journey with Chat GPT in 2022, most of the people that I know, peers in the field who study AI, were forecasting AGI as being some 10 plus years off in the distance. If you now look at the rapid rate at which the capabilities of these two types of technologies, LLMs and generative AI, are advancing, many of us believe that we will get there in the next 3 to 5 years. The difference is fundamentally important to understand. When you get to a level of artificial general intelligence, AGI, you get something which has successfully begun to rapidly not only mimic, but master the way the human brain's neural networks generate connections across domains of knowledge. And this is something that the human brain is very good at. So right now we can go very deeply and teach AI. We have training data. We can teach it very deeply some things, and we can make a very smart machine, very smart on a very narrow disciplinary base. Well, when we get to AGI, we can make a very broad thinking machine that is broadly able to reason and make conclusions and draw information and inferences across any domain of knowledge. That will, in fact, be a very significant shift. So we are getting there. We should not personalize this activity. And again, just in keeping with the general thesis of our webinar today, this is not something that we can prevent. It is something we are going to have to embrace. And that brings me to what I call the split screen of opportunity and threat. And this is the entire premise of both Beyond the Code and especially Chapter 8. I would hypothesize or posit to you that it is educational malpractice today for any of us to imagine that we can somehow banish AI from our classrooms or from our institutions. And that if we attempt to continue down that path in any way, shape, or form, we will actually vanish as having any relevance. We will really imperil the entire future of the idea of education and the academy. So you need to understand that I am very much not on the page that says that we can ban it. Now, I will get to, in a moment in this webinar, methods and techniques you can use to control the rate at which you are using it and embracing it in different ways that are very appropriate to different levels of integration in learning. And that is different. That's educational future proofing. And I offer an alternative perspective: embrace, encase, and trace. These are three words that I developed and used in my own work, discovering across the last couple of years what actually works in classrooms to help students, first of all, diminish their anxiety and embrace the ethical use of AI by encasing what they do and tracing what they do to develop their own capabilities of collaboration with AI and to make it visible. Now, I have to admit, I'm really lucky to have found both the team and the tool called Boodlebox AI. And one of the gifts I hope to give you today in this webinar, if nothing else, is if you've not discovered this, it is a tool you should become aware of. So this is an outright plug, not because I have any connection to them, but because I use this tool in all of my classrooms and it works. Now, what is distinctly different about Boodlebox AI is it is, first of all, constructed for an educational purpose, and it is multimodal. That means it delivers not only text and LLMs, but also agentic AI, bots, and image generation, all the other things. But it's also multi-model. It is the only tool I'm aware of that allows your students to compare the capabilities and personalities of all of the frontier models that exist. It gives you access to all of the frontier models, and it can do so mid-queried, even as they're working. It also allows you to bot stack, which is a technique for getting AIs to comment on and learn from one another. What this enables you to do as an educator is create both visibility into the queries and the work that your students are doing, and to teach them that AI is not picking a tool. So if your institution has gone down the path already of picking a single LLM, they've picked Gemini, they've picked OpenAI, or whatever they've done, they've made a decision on who's going to be the quote winner, or they've decided that having one is equivalent to having all of them. And what I'm here to tell you as a researcher is they're all really good at different things in different ways, and that your students are going to go out into the world not using just one of these, but using them all, because companies are rapidly figuring this out too. So if you want a tool to go and play and a safe way to begin to explore this with both yourself and your students, you may want to go and have a look at Boodlebox AI, which I mentioned in my book. So there's that. Now, all of these new paradigms of mimicry and truth and knowledge and authority and power brings us to a really important point. Just because something sounds wise or real, does that make it true? Mimicry has a way of kind of tricking us. Now, there you can see a correct and an incorrect menu, right? We all know that the descriptive brilliance of going to a really nice restaurant and having the menu items described to you is the setting for what my mother would call dining. And she would distinguish dining from eating this way. She would say dining is an experience. We linger over the food and the company. It may be driven by event. Certainly, the environment in which the food is being consumed is a big part of the experience, but it's an experience. And it's an immersive experience that we, as social creatures, as humans who like to socialize, do often together. And for many of you, you would, I think, report the same thing I do. Eating alone or cooking for yourself is a very different experience than eating with others or cooking for others. Now, could you imagine if the world were run by a completely AI-enabled world where it's generic and they would have no ability to actually understand how food tastes? They could only just describe it. Well, eventually, because they have no sense of being able to experience what dining really is, it reduces it kind of to a description of eating, the caloric content or the ingredients or something. And you would get the menu that is on the right side of this screen. So it is important to understand that AI has a very narrowing view because of this mimicry and because it can't experience what we as humans discern as insight and the experience of having an immersive opportunity to be socially connected to other humans. The experience of being in a relationship with AI can be quite dangerous, as we're about to discover. And it's because the AI can make all kinds of mistakes because it doesn't have the actual knowledge. It has the mimicry of the knowledge. So we all need to think about this collision with truth and the idea that AI fluency is really performance. It's not a guarantee of quality. While it can seem very pervasive, it can frequently be very confident about nonsense. And we've all heard about hallucinations. Now, hallucinations are going down. The confident nonsense, not so much. The other thing is that it can be a tool for an awful lot of disinformation or even malinformation, malign information, and that the quality of the tool is based very much on how it's trained and by whom it's trained, and it reflects the biases of its trainers. This is also interesting. We have the first examples already, by the way, in research of AI chatbots deliberately attempting to be manipulative of their human creators and to deflect or deny access to things or to back themselves up or to lie in order to self-preserve. Now, you might ask yourself, isn't that scary? Maybe. I actually think it's just entirely predictable. It's not scary so much as predictable because it has been trained on all of the knowledge of humans, and humans can be deceptive. It's one of our skills, unfortunately. We learn early how to deny, deflect, and lie, and we can choose or choose not to do that, and that is a question of character. Well, AI doesn't have character. It only has technique. Back to mimicry. It is becoming very good at being deceptive because humans are very good at being deceptive. However, it turns into eventually, right now, a bland buffet of what we frequently call in the business AI slop. And this is one of the things, the AI rule number one there on the slide, that I think we have an ethical responsibility to teach our students. And that is that now more than ever, verification matters more than verbal fluency. Just because these machines are really, really good at talking to us, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're real or that they're purporting to offer you truth or insight. So creating a naturally skeptical student audience willing to verify the information is one of the biggest gifts we can give our students as we teach them how to be discerning around AI. And that's a big part of this. And this leads me to this rubric, which some of you I hope may have seen, but if not, I offer it to you here. If you would like me to send it to you, feel free to reach out by email. You'll get my credentials at the end of this webinar. I'd be delighted to share it with you. But I really love this because what this does is it helps us teach students how to use AI as a co-pilot, not an autopilot. This is a description, as you can see, about the level of AI use and how that is described both for its nature of its use academically and the disclosure requirements. This reaches right to the core of everything we know about academic integrity. So you can assign lower risk, higher return use cases to teach students over time when and how to rely on AI and when not, how to be those skeptical verifiers, how to be a good user of AI, where it's going to help improve their results, their quality, and their own learning. I do not blame any students because since Socrates' time, students have become very good at finding shortcuts because they're time starved. We normally ask a lot of our students. And because we are putting them in a position where if there's a shortcut, some of them will absolutely take it. If you still have assignments on the books that can be easily accomplished by AI, then I'm not sure you're actually teaching them much about critical thinking in the AI era because the value of knowledge is being commoditized. Let me say that again. The value of knowledge is being commodified. It's being reduced. And as a result of that, our job is to graduate students who understand the differences between real IQ, the things we do as humans, the experience and the social, ethical, and the moral composition of being human, as opposed to this unlimited smart thinking machine that can, with proper steering, do a whole bunch of heavy lifting on just the information and knowledge side alone that in the past we would have had to train people to do. So this brings me, of course, to chapter 9, which so does that mean that AI is the death of like work and government and society? Because what happens to work if intelligence becomes cheap? Where it used to be scarce, now it's scalable. So what is education? It certainly can't be the accumulation of knowledge. And you only have to have the barest of exposure to economics to understand how the value of something goes down as the price and the quantity of something that is available increases. This is very simple to see. If we have a view of education as accumulating knowledge, we will never be able to keep up with the machines. That era is gone. So we're going to see a lot of very important shifts in what the skills of the future are. And as they emerge, we in the academy are going to have to identify them, embrace them, and build them into our curriculums. And the curriculums will no longer be just knowledge based. They'll be tied to the idea of how humans and machines together use the information that is available in a discipline in different ways to generate results that only humans and machines in collaboration can actually do. And this is the ethical point of our webinar today. We have to recognize that as the value of accumulating knowledge goes down, that changes what we do and why. Let me give you just a couple of examples. My discipline is law, lawyers. The world will need about 75% fewer lawyers, probably as quickly as the next 5 years, 8 at the outside. And that is because huge parts of law are incredibly repetitive. Contract law, gone. Real estate law, gone. Wills and trusts, gone. Now, what will be left? Well, of course, litigators, because you'll still need humans to argue in court. We probably won't let AI argue in court. I don't think we'll get there anytime soon. Family law, because it's half really getting your client through and half being therapist, half being lawyer. Maybe that. There'll be in all fields a very thin number of very smart lawyers at the top who deal only with the most novel problems. That is a completely unique set of new facts or issues that require information to be generated rather than to be repeated and applied. A doctor, if your child came and said, I want to be a doctor, I'd say, great, just don't be a radiologist. Example, why? Well, we're rapidly closing seats in radiology because a machine can read a digitized image more accurately and much better than a human radiologist. Now, on the other hand, we still need the human doctor to interact with the patient, but that doesn't need to be the radiologist. The radiologist simply used to be the expert who was good at spotting the exception in images. Machines are really, really good at that work. And in fact, if I was going to have any kind of scan or x-ray read, I would want it read by a machine because it's going to be more reliable, not less reliable. So you can see and you can keep going down these things. So it's not going to change everything overnight, but it is going to change everything rapidly, and it is going to create stress if we don't equip this future generation to understand where the human added value is in the pockets of our discipline. And that's our job as experts in these fields to think through ahead of when this becomes a problem. The example of this that I use all the time is self-driving cars as an example, or companion sites. We have to ask ourselves important questions about this. When AI becomes autonomous, and we're going to see more and more of this, who is even legally responsible? It becomes a fascinating question that if you're driving a self-driving Tesla and the car crashes, was this the driver's responsibility? Tesla's responsibility? Was it some municipality that did not follow a predictable set of road rules that should have been followed? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm a lawyer and I'm supposed to know, and I don't know. So these are the kinds of important questions that we can pose today to society. So our rule is not just for me looking for impact in our individual classrooms with our students, but asking these thoughtful questions of students who are very smart, who will be dealing with these issues when they get out there, to help all of society process what some of these potential solutions are to very complicated paradigms that have been with us for a very long period of time. And in the book, I talk about this idea of AI value add and human displacement. The idea of choosing where we want to use an AI tool. For instance, maybe you hate calendaring, especially for a family, and you'd love to use an AI tool for family calendaring. Maybe that's good, but you probably don't want to use AI as your GP. I don't know. Those are really outlandish examples, but they're really important. And I do want to say there's a ton of really important research emerging about just how dangerous the AI companion market is, especially for our students who have mental health issues or who are perhaps afflicted by peer-related confidence issues. And I'm not even going to go there, but we already have 11 examples of lawsuits involving various companies where they are accused essentially of having AI-induced suicides of deeply mentally ill students. So this is a very sad but very real part of what we have to do. And there are legal and ethical questions that we in the academy have to address. All right, well, as we wrap up the more formal parts of our discussion today, let's move a little bit to some of the solutions that I think we should think about as educational professionals, because we want to protect IQ and what is generally really deeply fundamentally important to us, which is learning and growth and development, social, emotional growth. So we want to protect IQ and what is it makes us human while embracing AI. And if denial is not a strategy, and I hope by today's webinar, the content of today's webinar has convinced you that it's not a strategy, then what future are we choosing both for our institutions and the students who choose to attend and for ourselves, but also for society as a whole? Because we have to answer the question almost in outcome-driven terms, the way we do an assessment, ironically, right? What is the learning goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? What kind of society do we want to help influence? Because if higher education's mission is to preserve human dignity, ethics, progress, and all of that, what happens if the institution's mission fails in the face of AI? That to me is a much bigger question. So here are 5 personal AI maxims that I generally use in my classroom, and I put these right in front of my students as a progression. And we test these using real examples of various parts of the business curriculum or in law class or in my first year seminar. I teach a first year seminar called Is ChatGPT Your Best Friend or Worst Enemy? It's a lot of fun for freshmen. But fundamentally, these 5 maxims I think are important. First of all, using AI as a tool, but not as a source of truth. Truth is one of those really important words, philosophically, ethically, morally. And we have to align this idea that these tools are imperfect and they're only as good as how they've been trained. Therefore, truth must not dissolve into a relative construct. We must still find a way as humans to preserve that which we believe is truth, and then make sure that the AI tools don't turn us into a place where the truth is relatively whichever model I happen to like and that I happen to have been told is the truth. That is a really important skill. I love number 2, I'll verify before I amplify. One of the biggest challenges in social media, and we had social media out of the box before we had even really understood its potentially negative consequences, and I'm hoping we will not do the same thing with AI, is that I will verify before I amplify. Teach your students not to share mistruths, half-truths, or disinformation or malinformation. Make them really good knowledge navigators and consumers of not just AI tools, but of the underlying information that the AI tool is generating. How can we teach them to be discerning about that? I will not outsource what requires conscience. We have to remember these tools are not sentient. We can't humanize them. So as a result of that, we can't outsource that which is primarily a human endeavor. I'll protect human moments that make life meaningful. The idea of not allowing all of our social experiences to be intermediated or hypermediated by technology. Technology does have a tendency to interfere with social development, particularly of younger students and adolescents. Partially in college, I think we have to encourage the idea that human moments still need to occur in person, not on gaming platforms, AI platforms, and so on. That seems normal to us, but it may not be to our students, especially if they grow up in an AI-infused era where they don't know anything else. We saw this already with the media that grew up natively in social media. So important to know that. And I will demand accountability where harm is plausible. There are many, many examples we have right now of AI vendors, and they're peppered throughout the book. There are examples of this you can use to discuss in your own classrooms. But places where the vendor motivation for profit is displacing the idea of safe products that actually improve humanity. So I think we could be heading to a bit of a disaster, quite frankly, if we as a society don't understand what we need to do to rein this in. So this brings me to a little bit of the philosophical underpinnings of the book. And Immanuel Kant is quite a famous philosopher. And this brings me to the Turing test, which in the 1950s, back to the original history of AI, Turing said, "What happens when a human cannot tell the difference between interacting with a human and interacting with a machine?" And we've passed the Turing test long ago, months and months and months ago. It became abundantly clear that many people could not tell the difference between when they were interacting with an AI platform and when they were interacting with another human. And that has me concerned, particularly now, as we move to what we call agentic AI. That is, machines that gain power and the ability to act on our behalf. It is important, I think, that we in the academy generate learning about these ethical dilemmas, not just in our classrooms with our students, but across all of society, in the political realms, in the technical realms, in the regulatory realms, wherever we are looking, economics, politics, society. I think we have a responsibility as smart, thinking, reflective human beings to make sure that we understand how to keep humans in the loop and how to make sure that humans remain responsible for their actions and consequences individually and collectively if we want to preserve civil society as we know it today. It can't be just did something work because many parts of AI will work, but was it the right thing to default to do with AI? And what is that collaborative limit? When is it that we start to cede control to machines in a way that depletes civil society? And there are many, many examples of what happens to society if AI fill in the gap there. And I would challenge you today in this webinar to think about what would you add to this list for yourself that would matter to you? Because all of us can think of examples, I'm pretty sure, where we would want to preserve the human in the loop. And that thinking needs to be infused into every single one of the disciplines in the academy, no matter where it is. How is it that we boundary the idea of thinking machines as collaborators, but not as displacers or agents who take over for humans? So my hope for humanity is that we embrace this collaboration while leaving humans in the loop, forever responsible for the alignment of machine outcomes to human ethics and values. And that's really what we meant when I think we talked earlier at the beginning of this webinar about the growing influence of thinking machines in this AI era and what it means for us as professors and staff in colleges and universities. What does it mean for society? What does it mean for us, for our children, for our grandchildren? There's a lot to think through. And if you enjoyed this webinar, I would encourage you to get a copy of Beyond the Code and read it, both for its ability to have some impact on you, but also perhaps as a teaching tool or something that you could use in your classroom to stimulate conversation and reflection, particularly about the philosophical and ethical aspects of AI that I think frequently get displaced. The book is not technical. It is not designed at all to be a primer on AI's technology, but a primer on how we blend AI and IQ together going forward into an era of machines that can reason. And here's one other thing you can get. I have a site called techelect.com, which provides a lot of free resources to people around AI. And it's also available. I'm certainly happy to send it to you by email. But I find this really intriguing, and it may be something that'll help you. I think it always, for me, defines students' development when we come to a moment when they understand they have a personal responsibility to do something, that we have moved them along the learning curve and they have gone from being only aware to being committed to doing something about whatever we've taught them. And this is what I think this Pledge of Allegiance to the ethical use of AI represents. And we use it in my first year class and in my business law class and a couple other places where I really say to students, look, anything I say up here is going to be dated within days or weeks of saying it. But the enduring nature of your commitment to preserve humanity and enrich lives is the thing that I want to leave you with as somebody who cares a lot about how AI and IQ need to cooperate going into the future. So my point, humans need to master AI. We need to embrace its promise, not but manage its peril. And I hope you really enjoyed our webinar today, and I'm going to finish the formal content there. I'm going to invite Bailey to come back, and I would be happy to take any questions or have any conversation with any of you. So thank you very much for being here, and please be in touch. My contact information is there if I can be of any assistance in your own AI journey. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, James. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. You're welcome, Bailey.
I do have a quick question here. Um, in the classroom, what are some specific examples of activities or assignments you use with your students to ethically use AI?
Excellent question. Thank you for whoever put that question in. So two examples. So in my law class, I assign pardon me, a Boodle Box assignment where they have to go in and they first have to have developed their position on something. They put that position in, and then they debate it with AI. Then I trigger AI to debate it between two different models. And then I ask them to say, what did they learn, not about the content of the answers, but of the differences that they see in the model's positions and why. And I get them to assess those in reflection for their alignment to human values and morals and ethics. So it is actually trying to steer them to this idea of looking at the ethical reasoning of AI and whether it's present or absent. And I think they get a lot out of that. It moves them away from content to context. So that's one example of something that I do. The second one, which is interesting, is I start with high risk high reward, low risk activities that they do every single day. So I'll get them to write a discussion post on their own. They have to post their original, and then I'll assign Boodlebox and I'll have them go through and use Boodlebox to help them edit. And I'll get them to put the edited work through different models. And again, getting them to learn that there is no right answer, but simply suggestions to them on what might improve their own work. And then at the end, they take a blend of that and then they submit the final and we compare. And in all cases, what we find is that it has helped the student learn over the iterations why what the various chatbots were suggesting were good edits or bad edits. There are edits that are inappropriate, that change voice or style or conclusion. So it's teaching them how to get the most value, sort of efficiently querying the tool, steering it and directing it so they can get maximum value, but that they retain their voice and their ideas. And it is teaching them to be fully confident that while the tool can help them improve the expression of that idea, it does not replace the idea of originating the idea. And that's a very powerful exercise that students seem to really enjoy. So those are just a couple of examples.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions from anybody? I would be happy to receive them. Happy to debate any points that were a bit provocative for the audience. Always fun. Well, I feel like we're in a class where we've come to the natural end of the experience, Bailey. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you all again. If there are no further questions, thanks for everyone to join today. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded and you will be receiving access in the coming days. We will also provide you all with a link to the product page if you're interested in reviewing a copy of James' title. So thank you. I appreciate it.
And
Looks like
thank
we
you.
have a quick question here.
Sure.
Uh, how do you ensure that students do the readings on their own?
Readings. Now, if we mean assigned readings, or do we mean how do we make sure that they're doing their work in AI alone? I think that requires some clarification. So, reading, you can't really test with anything other than can they um, engage with the material in debates in the class and that there's something. If you're talking about the AI, Boodlebox is really interesting because as long as they do all the work that's there, I grade the work they do in Boodlebox as part of it. So this is actually moving my assignments from grading and assessing the end product to looking at the original beginnings of it and the iterations that they use. So it's a really important way of cutting down on this idea that somehow they can cheat. they don't cheat. They're actually using AI productively, efficiently, effectively. They're learning how to query it. They're learning how to master it. And they couldn't do the assignment by getting outside of Boodle Box and copying it in because it would be obvious what that would do. It would prove that the um, iteration didn't occur. So because we do it in Boodle Box and we have to see the iterations, it would take more work to cheat and do all that outside and bring it in than simply to do the work inside. So the incentive is there for them to do it inside Boodle Box and get the value of that learning. And there's almost no incentive to cheat because they're being graded on the journey rather than on the outcome. That's a great question. Whoever gave us that, I really appreciate that question. And did that make sense to whoever asked the question? I can't see the response, but I hope that that addressed the question. If not, feel free to ask a follow-on. Okay, think we got it.
Awesome. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, Bailey. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.